He said I wasn't qualified. My coffee went cold before my confidence did. That's the day I stopped waiting for permission and started building my own table. My name's Helen, 45 years old, mother of one, former assistant manager at a logistics firm where my ideas built everyone's bonuses except mine. This is the story of how I went from being told, "You're not qualified," to signing the paycheck of the same man who said it. It was a Tuesday morning. Gray skies, printer jam, same stale coffee smell filling the air. I'd been working late for 3 months straight, covering shifts for people who didn't even bother to say thank you. But I didn't mind. I believed in paying dues. At least I used to. When I walked into the glass conference room that day, my resume felt heavier in my hands than usual. I'd updated it over the weekend, added every project I'd led, every contract I'd landed, every system I'd improved. All that hard work, lined up like soldiers ready for battle. Across the table sat Greg Wallace, my manager. Gray suit, smirk too confident for a man who never stayed past 5. He leaned back, arms crossed, that little chuckle already waiting on his lips. "So Helen," he said, pretending to read my resume, "you're applying for the senior operations position?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I've been running those reports and training new hires for over a year now." He nodded slowly, lips twitching. Right. You've done good work." That pause. That deadly pause where a compliment hides a knife. "But between us," he said, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret, "the higher-ups are looking for someone with a little more presence. Someone who's strategic." I tilted my head. "Strategic?" "Qualified," he said, finally letting the smirk stretch. "You know what I mean." I didn't. Not then. But I learned fast that qualified meant male, loud, and mediocre with confidence. That night, I sat in my car in the office parking lot, engine off, rain tapping soft against the windshield. My phone buzzed with a text from my son, Marcus. "Ma, you eat yet?" I smiled through tears. That boy always checking on me like he was the parent. I texted back, "Not yet, just finishing up." But I wasn't finishing up. I was breaking down. I looked at the empty passenger seat and said out loud, "Qualified." That word sat in my chest like a weight. Every woman I knew had been crushed by that word at least once. So I decided to stop waiting for validation. I was done begging for a seat at a table I'd been setting for years. That night, I opened my laptop and started sketching a logo for H. Harper Logistics Consulting. I didn't have a business plan, an office, or investors. But I had fire, and fire will burn through paperwork any day. By the end of the week, I'd taken a loan. Small, personal, risky. I sold my old jewelry, the one with the initials of a man who left when life got hard. I bought a cheap printer, secondhand desk, and a coffee maker that made the whole house smell like ambition. Marcus came in one morning, rubbing his eyes. "Ma, what's all this?" I smiled, taping a sheet of paper to the wall. My company name printed bold across it. "This," I said, "is my new office." "In the kitchen?" He laughed. "For now," I said. "But someday soon, baby, people will come here to learn how to run their offices." He looked at me like I'd just said I could fly. "Ma, are you serious?" I looked back, steady. Dead serious. The first 6 months were rough. No clients, no sleep, no guarantees. Just rejection emails and overdraft notices. But every no built muscle in me I didn't know I had. Every slam door taught me to build my own. I'd spend nights watching YouTube tutorials on logistics software, business licensing, and cold pitching. I even printed fake client names just to practice invoices. Manifestation with a spreadsheet. Marcus would sit beside me, pretending to do homework while really just making sure I didn't cry too long. One night he said, "Ma, why don't you just rest?" I laughed. "Rest is for people who don't have something to prove." He frowned. "Prove to who?" I looked at him, the glow of the laptop bouncing off his curious little face. "To myself," I said, "and to every Greg who ever thought a woman like me couldn't lead." A year later, the calls started coming in. First small, independent truckers needing help filing routes and schedules, then regional distributors asking for optimization plans, then the big one, Continental Freight Corp., one of the biggest logistics companies in the state. I remember the call vividly. "Ms. Harper," said the woman on the other end, "we've been hearing about your firm. We'd like to bring you in to consult on a restructuring project." I nearly dropped the phone. That weekend, I ironed my best blazer, polished my heels, and walked into their downtown office like I belonged there. Because I did. The boardroom was sleek and cold, all glass and chrome. And right there, sitting across the table, was Greg Wallace. Older. Same smirk. Only this time, I was the one being introduced. The woman beside him said, "Greg, this is Helen Harper. She'll be leading the operations audit." He blinked twice, then smiled that tight, fake smile. "Helen? From Talbot and Reed?" I smiled back. "The very same." I saw his jaw tighten. He cleared his throat. "Well, congratulations." "Thank you," I said sweetly. "You know, I almost applied for a position here once, but I wasn't qualified." He looked away. The silence in that glass room was worth every sleepless night. Weeks passed, and I ran that project like a symphony. Every schedule, every shipment, every cost-cutting measure, perfect. Even Greg started taking notes during my meetings. He'd lean over and whisper to the new interns like I used to. Funny how tables turn, and who ends up sitting at the head. When the project wrapped, the CEO himself shook my hand. "Ms. Harper," he said, "we'd like to retain your firm on a permanent contract. And by the way, we're restructuring internally. Mr. Wallace will now report directly to your office for quarterly updates." My breath caught, but I didn't let it show. I just nodded. Professional, calm, dignified. But when I walked out that building, I laughed so hard I cried. A month later, Greg sent an email. Subject, opportunity? "Hey Helen, heard your firm's expanding. I'd love to bring my experience on board if you're hiring." I reread that line 3 times. "If you're hiring." I wrote back, "Thank you, Greg. We are hiring. Please submit your application via our website. But note, we're only looking for highly qualified candidates." Hit send, sip my coffee. Watch the sun rise over the city I built my dream in. Now, when I walk into my office, real one this time, not the kitchen table, I see women like me running the place. Mothers, fighters, believers. People who were told, "You're not qualified," until they decided they were. Marcus works here now too, head of tech systems. Every time he signs a check for payroll, he says it out loud, laughing, "Ma, you really hired your old boss." And I just smile, sip my coffee, and whisper to myself, "Qualified." 3 months after hiring Greg, I caught him in the break room one morning, leaning against the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee like nothing had ever happened. He looked up, all polite now. "Morning, Helen." "Morning, Greg." The way he said my name, soft, careful, made me think he finally understood who he was talking to. But I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. Power is quiet when it's real. The office was buzzing that day. New contracts coming in, clients asking for training sessions. I'd built a team of 12, 10 women, 2 men, all from backgrounds people like to overlook. One of them, Tanya, a single mom with a GED, was now running our scheduling department like a general. When I passed her desk, she looked up. "Ms. Harper, we just got a call from Continental Freight again. They want to renew the contract and double the retainer." I smiled. That's what happens when you don't chase approval. It starts chasing you. Across the room, Greg glanced over. He'd heard. He always did. Later that week, we had our quarterly review. Everyone was gathered in the conference room. My team on one side, Greg on the other, still trying to find his place among the people he used to dismiss. I stood at the front of the room, projector light glowing over my shoulder. "All right," I said, clicking to the first. "Slide. Let's talk numbers. Revenue up 142%, retention rate 98%, client satisfaction glowing. Then I paused just long enough for the silence to make him look up. And this, I said, is what unqualified leadership looks like when it finally gets a chance. A ripple of laughter ran through the team. Even Tanya chuckled, shaking her head like, "Lord," she said it. Greg kept his eyes on the chart, didn't say a word. After the meeting, he approached me in the hallway. "Listen, Helen," he said, voice low. "I know things didn't start off ideal between us." "Didn't start off ideal," I repeated, sipping my coffee. "That's one way to describe humiliation." He winced. "I didn't mean it like that back then. You know how corporate can be. Decisions weren't all mine." "Maybe not," I said, "but the laugh was." He sighed. "Look, I just want a chance to prove myself. I'm not the same person I was." I studied him for a second. The man was still wearing the same gray suit style from 5 years ago, but now it didn't fit as well. The weight of humility changes your posture. "You'll get your chance," I said finally. "Just remember, I don't promote based on who talks loudest. I promote based on who listens." He nodded. "Fair enough." Weeks rolled by. The rhythm of business became steady. My mornings started with gospel jazz, my notebook open, coffee steaming, candle burning beside my laptop. The scent of lavender and second chances. Sometimes Marcus would drop by my office before heading out to meet clients. "Ma," he'd say, leaning in the doorway, "you're trending again." "Trending?" He grinned, holding up his phone. "Some podcast featured your company as a Black-owned logistics disruptor. You're officially a case study." I laughed. They better spell my name right. Around that time, I got an invitation to speak at the National Women in Leadership Summit in D.C. The theme, "When they doubt you, build anyway." I didn't even need to write a speech. My whole life was won. I flew out with Marcus as my assistant. The ballroom was filled with executives, entrepreneurs, and women who looked like they'd survived 10 lifetimes before breakfast. When it was my turn to speak, I walked on stage, heels clicking against the polished floor. Spotlights. Silence. I took a breath. When I was told I wasn't qualified, I began, I believed them. For about 5 minutes. Laughter. I thought qualifications came from degrees and titles. Turns out they come from perseverance, resilience, and knowing how to rise when no one's clapping. Every woman in that room leaned forward, and when I ended with, "Now I sign the checks for the people who used to sign mine," the applause felt like thunder, wrapped in tears. Marcus caught my eye from the side of the stage, grinning wide. That boy had seen me cry over overdue bills and broken printers. Now he was watching me redefine power in heels. After the conference, I got a message from an old coworker, Denise, the only one who defended me back then. "Helen, I saw your talk online. Girl," I cried, "you always had it in you. Greg called you unqualified, but he couldn't see your calling. Proud of you." I sent her a voice note. "Thank you, sis. It wasn't about proving him wrong, it was about proving God right." A few days later, Greg knocked on my office door. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I said, motioning to the chair across from me. He sat, hands clasped, looking nervous. "I got a call from an old contact at Talbot and Reed," he began. "They're downsizing. I might have been considered redundant." I stayed quiet. He continued. "They offered me a severance, but honestly, Helen, I'd rather stay here. Work under you full time. You've built something real." I nodded slowly. "You're already here, Greg, but if you're asking whether I'll ever forget how you treated me..." He shook his head. "I'm not asking you to. I just hope I can make it right by how I show up now." That stopped me for a moment. Not the words, the tone. It wasn't performative. It was human. I leaned back. "All right then, let's see what you can do." He smiled, small, relieved. "Thank you." As he walked out, I whispered to myself, "Redemption's a beautiful thing, but it don't erase memory." it just rewrites it. That night, I found myself journaling again, pages filled with thoughts I'd never had the time to write down when I was chasing someone else's approval. Power doesn't always roar, I wrote. Sometimes it hums quietly from the corner office they said you'd never reach. A few months later, Continental Freight held a gala for their partners. When I arrived, the CEO personally greeted me. "Miss Harper, the woman who saved our shipping division." I laughed. "You give me too much credit." "Not enough," he said. "Would you mind saying a few words later?" I glanced at Marcus, who was straightening his tie like a proud stage mom. "Sure," I said. "Why not?" Halfway through the evening, they handed me the microphone. I stepped up, scanning the crowd, and there he was again, Greg, standing with a glass of champagne, smiling like someone who finally understood grace. I took a breath. 5 years ago, I began. I was sitting in a small office being told I wasn't qualified. Tonight, I'm here as a partner. That's what happens when you stop asking for permission to be powerful. Applause filled the room, but my eyes stayed on Greg's. He raised his glass slightly, nodding. That moment, that silent exchange, wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. Later that night, back in the hotel room, Marcus said, "Ma, you think he ever really got it?" I smiled. Maybe. But it's not about him getting it. It's about me outgrowing the need for him to. He laughed. "You should put that on a t-shirt." "Or an invoice," I said. Weeks later, Tanya called me into her office. "Ms. Harper, we've got a potential investor, big one. They want to help scale us nationwide." I blinked. "Nationwide?" She nodded, grinning. "Yes, ma'am. They said they've been watching your story online. They call it the Helen effect." I laughed. The Helen effect? Lord. But deep down, I felt it. That full circle warmth. The kind you only get after walking through fire barefoot and realizing your feet still work. Now, when I walk past the conference room and see Greg training new hires, patient, humble, helpful, I don't see the man who laughed. I see the man who learned. And maybe that's the real victory. Not just changing your own life, but forcing others to grow by the reflection of what you became. Sometimes I catch him glancing at my office door, not with envy, with respect. And every now and then, he'll say quietly as he leaves, "Good night, Miss Harper," and I'll smile. "Good night, Greg. See you bright and early." Because grace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bitterness. 6 months later, our company, H. Harper Logistics, moved into a glass tower downtown. Top floor. My name etched on the door in gold. I still remember the day I carried that first box into the new office. It had a single framed photo inside, me and Marcus in front of the kitchen table that started it all. That table, with chipped corners and coffee rings, had seen every tear, every plan, every prayer. Now it sat in the lobby like a trophy. Our receptionist called it the Table of Faith. Clients touched it for luck. We'd gone from a side hustle to a corporation, partnerships across 5 states, government contracts rolling in, and me, the woman once told she wasn't qualified, now sat on panels about leadership and equity. But with success came something I didn't expect: distance. Not from people, from peace. I was working 12-hour days again, not to prove myself anymore, but to maintain everything I'd built. And some nights, the silence in that big new office felt louder than the applause ever did. One evening, Marcus knocked on my door, laptop under his arm. "Ma, you got a minute?" "Always," I said, pushing my glasses up. "What's up?" He hesitated. "Greg asked me for mentorship." I raised an eyebrow. "Greg? As in..." "Yeah, that Greg. Said he wants to learn tech side operations. Asked if I could train him." I leaned back. "And what did you say?" I said sure, he shrugged. "People can change, right?" I studied my son for a long second. His heart was bigger than mine sometimes. He'd seen revenge done the right way, through redemption, not ruin. "You did right," I said softly. "Teach him. Let him see what real qualification looks like." A few weeks later, I found the two of them in the break room, Marcus explaining software logistics while Greg nodded, taking notes like a student. For a moment, I stood in the doorway unseen, watching humility rebalance the scales. Greg looked up finally and noticed me. "Hey, Ms. Harper," he said with a smile. "I was just telling Marcus. I wish I'd listened to you years ago." I smiled. It's all right. Listening takes a different kind of qualification. By summer, we were invited to submit a proposal for the biggest contract yet, the Federal Freight Modernization Project. It would triple our revenue overnight. Every major logistics firm in the region wanted it. I gathered the team that Friday. "All right, family," I said, standing in front of the whiteboard. "This one's different. It's not just about numbers. It's about legacy. We're not competing for approval anymore. We're demonstrating destiny." Tanya raised her hand. "Ma'am, if we win this, when we win this," I corrected with a grin. "When we win, I'm giving everyone here a bonus big enough to make the IRS sweat." Laughter filled the room. That sound, joy mixed with disbelief, was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. But life, as it does, tested me right when the finish line came into view. One evening, 2 weeks before submission, I got a call from my mother's caregiver in Georgia. "Ms. Harper, your mama's not doing too well. She's asking for you." I dropped everything. Caught the first flight out that night. When I walked into her hospital room, she smiled weakly. "Well, if it ain't my CEO daughter," she whispered. I took her hand. "Mama, you always said I'd own something one day." She smiled. "Baby, you always owned your worth. Just took the world a little longer to catch up." I stayed for 3 days. In between doctors and prayers, I was still sending documents to the office, coordinating via Zoom, but I knew the team could handle it. On the last night before I left, Mama grabbed my wrist. "Don't let success make you forget to rest. You fought for peace. Don't let it slip away now." Her voice cracked on that last word. Peace. That night, she fell asleep to the hum of the heart monitor, and I whispered, "I won't, Mama, I promise." When I got back to the city, the office was alive. Tanya ran up, waving a folder. "Miss Harper, we did it. Proposal's finalized. On time, ahead of everyone." I smiled through exhaustion. "Good job, y'all." Greg stepped forward. "I took care of the compliance documents you usually handle. Hope I did it right." I nodded. "You did. Thank you." He paused. "Just wanted to earn that thank you for once." The next morning, I was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed. Email subject line, "Congratulations, contract awarded." I read it twice, then 3 times, and finally, I screamed. Marcus ran in. "Ma, what happened?" I held up my phone. "We won it, baby. We got the federal contract." He grabbed me in a hug, spinning me around like I was still his little league cheerleader. The whole office gathered, clapping, laughing, crying. I stood on a chair and said, 5 years ago, they told me I wasn't qualified. Today, the United States government says otherwise." Cheers erupted, phones out, people filming. That clip went viral by the next morning. 2 weeks later, I was invited to Washington, D.C. again, this time not to speak, but to sign. When I arrived at the contract office, the representative said, "We've never seen a minority woman-owned firm score this high on an evaluation." I smiled. "That's because we stopped aiming to fit in and started proving why we should lead." When I got back home, Greg asked if he could see me. He stepped into my office, holding a small folder. "What's that?" I asked. He handed it over. "My resignation letter." I blinked. "You quitting?" He shook his head. "Graduating. I got accepted into a logistics leadership program. I just wanted to thank you before I go." I smiled. "Well, look at you. Finally qualified." He laughed. "Guess it runs in the office now." I stood and hugged him, not out of nostalgia, out of closure. Go do good, Greg. And remember, leadership isn't about titles. It's about what you build when no one believes in you. After he left, I looked out the window at the city skyline, the same skyline I used to stare at from a bus seat on my way to a job that broke my spirit. Now it looked like a reflection of everything I'd rebuilt, piece by patient piece. That night, I wrote another journal entry. Vindication isn't loud. It's quiet like sunrise, and it always shows up right on time. The following Monday, I walked past that old table in the lobby again. It had coffee stains, burn marks, and a crack down the middle. I ran my fingers over it and whispered, "Thank you for holding me when I couldn't hold myself." Tanya saw me and smiled. "You talking to that table again, Ms. Harper?" I laughed. "Every morning, it's got better advice than half the folks on LinkedIn." She grinned. "Well, it listens better, too." Later that afternoon, Marcus called me into the boardroom. When I opened the door, the whole team was standing there. Balloons, cake, confetti. The cake read, "To the woman who redefined qualified." I froze. Marcus handed me a card. Inside it said, "For every woman who was told she wasn't enough, you showed us we already were." Tears came fast this time, but they weren't from pain. They were from peace. I lifted my glass. To every person who was laughed at, overlooked, underestimated, may your doubt become your down payment on destiny. They cheered. And in that moment, I realized revenge had never been the goal. Legacy was. The funny thing about winning is how quiet it gets afterward. You think the noise will fill the room forever. The applause, the congratulations, the cameras flashing. But once it fades, you're left with yourself. And yourself has questions applause can't answer. Like, what now? Who am I when the fight is over? It was a Thursday morning when the silence hit me hardest. The sunlight was pouring through my office blinds, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, and still, something felt off. I stared at my desk, covered in contracts, plaques, and business cards, and realized I hadn't laughed freely in weeks. Not that tired, polite laugh you give in meetings, the real kind, the one that shakes your shoulders and makes you forget your worries. That's when my phone buzzed. "You're late, Auntie." It was Tasha, my niece, 25, loud and brilliant. She'd started working for us part-time while finishing her MBA. I'd promised to meet her for brunch that morning. I sighed, grabbed my purse, and said to myself, "All right, Helen, even the strong need a mimosa." Tasha was already at the cafe when I arrived. She waved me down from a patio table, phone in one hand, latte in the other. "Auntie, you made it," she said, standing to hug me. "Barely," I said, laughing. "You young folks keep early hours for brunch." She grinned. "That's because we stay up late making money moves." I raised an eyebrow. "Or TikToks." "Both," she said proudly. We sat, ordered avocado toast I didn't want, and started talking. Tasha leaned forward. "Auntie, can I ask you something real?" "Always." "When did you stop feeling like you had to prove yourself?" That question hit me like a sermon. I stirred my coffee slowly. "You think I stopped?" Her eyes widened. "You mean even after all this?" I nodded. "Success don't silence old wounds, baby. It just changes the volume." She frowned. "But you did it. You made it." I smiled. "Made it where?" "Success ain't a place, it's a practice. You keep showing up even after the applause dies down." She sat back, quiet, then said softly, "Guess I still got time to learn that." I reached across the table, took her hand. "You got time, and you got me. That's a good start." Later that afternoon, back at the office, I found Tanya pacing in the hallway, phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, her face dropped. "Miss Harper," she whispered, covering the mic. "We got a problem." "What kind of problem?" She handed me the phone. "Our banking rep. He says there's been a discrepancy." I took the phone. "This is Helen Harper." The voice on the other end sounded nervous. "Miss Harper, it appears there's been unauthorized activity on your company account. Transfers flagged from a secondary approval code." My chest tightened. "How much?" "About $70,000. Silence, cold, sharp, immediate. Tanya looked terrified. I kept my voice calm. Freeze the account. Now. For the next 3 hours, it was chaos. We pulled logs, checked passwords, reviewed access. Turns out the code used for the transfer belonged to Greg, Tanya said at first. Miss Harper, I think he might have done it. I didn't want to believe her. Greg? The man who'd finally learned humility? The man Marcus mentored? But the evidence was there. His login, his credentials, his timestamp. I sat in my chair, stunned. It felt like déjà vu, another betrayal just when I'd learned to trust again. Marcus walked in an hour later, laptop in hand. "Ma, I got the logs. It's bad." I looked at him, eyes heavy. "Show me." He turned the screen around. Wire confirmations, same code, same time. Each transfer labeled under a fake vendor name, GW Logistics. I rubbed my forehead. Greg Wallace Logistics. Marcus nodded grimly. He used his initials, real sloppy. I closed my eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was about the insult. After everything, after forgiveness, after grace, he'd done it again. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't even cry. I just whispered, "Call him in." When Greg walked into my office 30 minutes later, he looked calm. Too calm. "Hey, Helen," he said. "Tanya said you needed to see me." I motioned to the chair. "Sit." He sat. I turned the laptop toward him. "These transfers? Care to explain?" His eyes darted to the screen. He hesitated, then sighed. "I was going to pay it back." That sentence alone told me everything. Marcus stepped forward, furious. "You stole from my mother's company." Greg stood up. I was struggling, all right. My wife left, I had debt, and I held up a hand. "Stop. You had a key, you had trust, you had grace, and you cashed it out for $70,000. He dropped his head. "I know, I'm sorry." I stared at him for a long time, then said softly, "You weren't qualified to lead back then, and you're still not qualified to be a man now." He winced like I'd hit him, but I wasn't cruel. I was clear. "Greg," I continued, "I'm not pressing charges. You'll pay back every cent, and you'll never step foot in this building again." Tanya's eyes widened. Marcus started to protest, but I cut them both off. I said no jail, not because he deserves mercy, but because I deserve peace. Greg left without another word, just a nod. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like finality. Tanya exhaled. "Ma'am, you sure about that?" I nodded. If I spend my power chasing revenge, I start living like the version of me they already doubted. Marcus frowned. "So that's it?" I looked at him. "No, that's the end of him in my story. But trust me, life will write the rest." The next morning I came in early. The sun hadn't even touched the skyline yet. I walked through the quiet office, heels echoing against marble floors, and stopped in front of the window. The city was still. My reflection looked strong and tired. That's when I whispered to myself, every empire needs a reminder it's built by humans, not gods. I made myself a promise that day. No more saving people who drain me. No more grace for the ungrateful. No more guilt for protecting my peace. 2 weeks later, Tanya handed me a letter. "Came in the mail for you, Ms. Harper. No return address." I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $70,000 and a note. "You were right. I wasn't qualified, but maybe I can learn how to be. Greg." I folded the note carefully, placed it in my journal, and whispered, "Growth counts too." Then I smiled, because sometimes revenge doesn't look like payback. It looks like somebody finally understanding the weight of what they lost. That evening, Marcus came by my house. He found me on the porch, rocking chair creaking, sunset painting the world gold. He said, "You okay, Ma?" I nodded. "Yeah, I just feel free again." He smiled. "You always come out clean, Ma." I laughed softly. "That's 'cause I learned to stop rolling in the mud with folks who like being dirty." He chuckled. "You should put that on a t-shirt." "Maybe I'll start a brand," I said, smirking. "Call it Qualified." A few weeks after Greg's letter arrived, life found its rhythm again, but quieter, wiser. The chaos had settled into something softer, like the air after a thunderstorm, heavy but healing. I started walking to work again, not because I had to, but because I liked remembering how far I'd come. Every block between my old bus stop and my new building felt like a chapter. When you've walked through fire, even cracked sidewalks feel holy. One morning, I stopped by a little bakery near the office. The owner, Miss Laverne, silver hair, southern drawl, voice like velvet, was wiping down the counter. "Morning, baby," she said. "You look like a woman who's been through a storm and came out with a rainbow." I smiled. Something like that. She leaned in. "Storms make the roots stronger. Don't ever forget that." I carried that line with me all day. That afternoon, I had a meeting with a new client, Denton and Sloan Distribution, a national freight company expanding into the South. Their CEO, Mr. Sloan, was a polished man with too much cologne and not enough eye contact. "So, Miss Harper," he said, flipping through my proposal, "I must admit we were surprised by your bid." "Surprised how?" I asked, steady. He smiled. "Well, for a firm your size, your projections are ambitious." I'd heard that word before, ambitious. The polite cousin of arrogant when spoken, by a man who doesn't expect excellence from a woman like me. I smiled sweetly. "Ambition built the table you're sitting at." He chuckled. "Touché." 2 days later, he signed the contract. That win set off another wave. Emails, interviews, more offers than we could take. But something about the energy felt different. My company wasn't just growing anymore, it was becoming. It had its own heartbeat, its own story, its own reputation. Clients didn't come for logistics consulting anymore. They came for the Helen method. Around that time, I got a call from Forbes Women. They wanted to feature me in their Leaders Who Rose from the Ashes issue. The interview was held in our office. They wanted authentic workspace footage. When the camera crew arrived, Tanya was fussing over the lighting. "Ms. Harper, they said we should show your first workspace for context. Do you still have that old table?" I grinned. "It's in the lobby. Tell them to start there." When the cameras rolled, I stood by that table, placed my hand on the wood, and said, "This is where everything began. No investors, no fancy board, just a woman with a laptop, a prayer, and a word she was tired of hearing. Unqualified." The journalist looked up. "And now?" I smiled. "Now I'm overqualified for anyone else's approval." The story went live 2 weeks later. Within 24 hours, it hit 3 million views. Emails flooded in. Women from everywhere writing me paragraphs that started with, "I needed this today." One message stood out. "Ms. Harper, I'm a 52-year-old nurse who just got told I'm too old to lead. I read your story, walked into my boss's office, and handed him my resignation, starting my own home care service next month. You made me remember I'm not done." I sat in my office, tears falling onto the keyboard. That's when I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a blueprint. Marcus came in a few minutes later. He saw the tears, panicked. "Ma, who messed up?" I laughed. "Nobody, baby. These are good tears. The kind that wash away the old version of you." He smiled, sat down across from me. "You know, Ma, you built more than a company." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah," he said softly. "You built a mirror. People see themselves in your story and start believing again." That boy always knew how to turn my heart inside out. Later that month, Tanya suggested hosting our first annual conference. Qualified, the Summit for Women Who Build. "Miss Harper," she said, "you should be the keynote speaker. Tell the story in person." I chuckled. "You just want to see if I cry on stage." She grinned. "You always do. That's why it works." The day of the summit, the ballroom was packed. Over 400 women in power suits, sneakers, and hope. The backdrop behind the stage said, "Not qualified, chosen." As I stepped up to the podium, the room went silent. I looked out at all those faces, different colors, ages, stories, all carrying the same quiet hunger to be seen. I began. 5 years ago, I was told I wasn't qualified. But what they didn't know is that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. The room erupted. I shared everything. The humiliation, the kitchen table, the stolen money, the redemption. And when I finished, the entire room stood up, clapping, crying, chanting, "Qualified, qualified, qualified!" That sound, that chant, felt like generations healing. After the event, a woman approached me backstage. She was older, maybe late 60s, hair silver like moonlight. She said, "Miss Harper, I just wanted to thank you. I was told I couldn't run my own firm because I didn't have a degree. Now I've got 6 employees and a waiting list. You reminded me I wasn't crazy. I was just early." I hugged her tight. "Early always feels like lonely at first," I said, "but that's how you know you're a pioneer." A week later, our company inbox pinged with something unexpected. A letter from Talbot and Reed, my old employer. They were under new management and wanted to hire H. Harper Logistics as a consultant. I read it twice, then 3 times, then laughed until I had to sit down. Tanya peeked in. "You good, Miss Harper?" I held up the email. "The same company that told me I wasn't qualified just asked for my help fixing their systems." She grinned. "What you gonna do?" I smiled. "Send them my rates, the premium package." A month later, I walked back into that old office. Same carpet, same smell of stale coffee and ambition. But this time, I wasn't carrying a résumé. I was carrying authority. The new manager shook my hand nervously. "Ms. Harper, it's an honor." "Pleasure's mine," I said. And as I looked around that familiar room, memories flickered. Greg's smirk, my trembling hands, that sting of being dismissed. But the air felt different now, lighter, healed. I spent the day training their new hires. At one point, a young intern raised her hand. "Miss Harper, how do you deal with people who underestimate you?" I smiled. "You let them. Then you let success finish the sentence." She grinned. "That's good. Can I tweet that?" "Tweet it, print it, tattoo it if you want," I said, laughing. When I left that day, I took the long way out, past the same door I once stood in, hearing, "You're not qualified." I paused, placed my hand on the frame, and whispered, "Thank you for being wrong." Then I walked out without looking back. By the time summer turned to fall, H. Harper Logistics wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement. Women were tagging me online in posts about promotions, new businesses, and quiet victories. Qualified was trending every other week, but even in success, I knew storms don't retire. They just change shape. One Monday morning, Tanya burst into my office, eyes wide. "Miss Harper, you're not going to believe this." "What's wrong?" She handed me her phone. A news headline glared back at me. "Former employee of H. Harper Logistics arrested for fraud, connected to rival firm." The photo underneath, Greg Wallace. I read the article twice, silent. Turns out, after he left us, he'd been consulting for another logistics firm, the same one that had underbid us on 2 recent contracts. They were running false invoices, inflating vendor numbers. Greg had been caught moving money through shell accounts. Marcus came in a few minutes later, phone already buzzing. "Ma, the press is calling. You want me to handle statements?" I looked up slowly. "No, let me." By noon, my PR team had drafted a release, but I scrapped their corporate tone and wrote my own. Our company believes in accountability and grace, but also boundaries. We gave second chances where others wouldn't. We don't regret it, because believing in people, even the wrong ones, is still what makes us human. It went viral within hours, not for the scandal, for the strength. One woman commented, "You just taught me how to forgive without folding." And I thought, maybe that's my real product now. Not logistics, but lessons. That evening, Marcus sat across from me at dinner. He said, "Ma, you handled that like the president." I laughed. I handled it like a mother who's seen worse. He smiled. You still trust people after all that? I took a slow sip of tea. I trust God's plan. People are just side characters in it. He nodded. That's deep. It's survival, I said quietly. 2 weeks later, a woman named Reverend Mariah Fields invited me to speak at her church's women's conference. Theme: Grace over Grudges. I hesitated. I'm not a preacher, Reverend, I told her. She smiled through the phone. Oh, Ms. Harper, every woman who's been broken and rebuilt preaches without a pulpit. So I said yes. The day of the conference, I stood on a small stage in front of 200 women. No fancy lighting, no cameras, just hearts listening. I took the mic. When I was told I wasn't qualified, I began, I thought that was rejection. Turns out, it was redirection. They clapped softly. So I went deeper. I used to think forgiveness was for them, but baby, forgiveness is for you. Because bitterness don't hurt the snake. It poisons the healer. A few women stood up crying, and I realized something right there. Every pain I'd survived was now a language someone else needed to hear. After the event, Reverend Mariah hugged me tight. God gave you storytelling for a reason, she whispered. You heal through truth. That night, I sat at home with my journal again. I wrote, I used to dream of revenge. Now I dream of reach, the next. Morning, Tanya came in early, waving another email. Ms. Harper, I think you're going to like this one. I took it. Subject line: TEDx invitation. The power of being unqualified. I blinked. Lord, they finally caught up. Preparing that speech was harder than any contract I'd ever written, because this wasn't about numbers or achievements. It was about standing naked in truth, without bitterness, without ego, without armor. When the day came, I walked on that red circle, took a deep breath, and began. When you're told you're not qualified, it can break you, or it can build you. But the secret is, qualification was never theirs to give. The crowd leaned in. Every pause felt electric. Every story, from the rain-soaked car that night to hiring Greg, landed like gospel. And when I ended with, if they won't open the door, build one, and hire them later to hold it for you, the audience erupted. That talk hit over 10 million views in a month, and with it came another wave: invitations, partnerships, speaking tours. But the biggest one came from the Department of Commerce. They wanted to create a mentorship program for women in supply chain management and name it the Harper Initiative. I sat in silence after the call, then whispered to myself, they said I wasn't qualified. Now I'm the qualification. Marcus walked in as I was still sitting there, hand over my mouth. He said, Ma, you look like you saw a ghost. I laughed. Baby, I think I just saw my purpose. The launch ceremony was held at the same D.C. building where I'd first spoken years ago. As I walked up to the podium, I caught my reflection in the glass. Older now, softer but stronger. I began, we teach our daughters to chase degrees and titles, but we forget to teach them how to chase courage, because courage is the only qualification that never expires. The crowd stood, flashes, applause. But the sound that echoed in my head wasn't theirs. It was Greg's voice. You're not qualified. Only now it sounded smaller, distant, powerless. After the ceremony, I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights glittered like applause that never stopped. A woman waiting by the steps tapped my shoulder. Ms. Harper? Yes? She smiled nervously. I'm Greg Wallace's daughter. He wanted me to thank you. My breath caught. For what? She handed me an envelope. For grace. Inside was a photo of Greg teaching at a community college. A note scribbled in the corner. Still learning. Still grateful. Thank you for letting me fall without closing the door behind me. I stood there for a long moment, tears hot and holy. Then I whispered to myself, Redemption really does run on its own time. That night, I walked along the reflecting pool near the Lincoln Memorial, shoes in hand, wind brushing against my face, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was walking toward anything. I was just walking, free. The morning after the Harper Initiative launch, I woke up before sunrise, not from anxiety, from peace. That soft, steady kind that hums under your skin like a quiet hallelujah. For years, my mornings had started with alarms, schedules, and caffeine. Now they started with gratitude. I brewed my coffee, opened the window, and let the cool air kiss my face. Outside, the world was still, not silent, just listening. And I whispered to it, "Thank you for the delay. It taught me everything the shortcut never could." At the office, things had shifted too. People weren't just working, they were believing. Every cubicle had a small note on the wall with a word they'd chosen for the year: faith, discipline, grace, and the one above my desk, enough. That day, Tanya came into my office holding her phone with both hands like it was made of glass. "Miss Harper," she said softly, "you might want to see this." It was a post on LinkedIn. Greg Wallace, profile picture updated, suit crisp, smile humble. His post read, "5 years ago, I laughed at a woman who outworked me, outloved me, and outlasted me. I called her unqualified. Today, I tell my students that humility is the highest degree. Thank you, Helen Harper." Thousands of comments, tens of thousands of likes. And for the first time, I didn't feel a single spark of anger, only closure. I smiled. He learned. Tanya's eyes shimmered. "You really did change people, Miss Harper." I nodded, only because pain changed me first. Later that week, Marcus surprised me with an idea. "Ma," he said, walking into my office with a grin, "you ever thought about writing a book?" I laughed. "Baby, my life already is a book." He grinned wider. "Exactly, let's publish it." I rolled my eyes. "Who'd read it?" He crossed his arms. "The 3 million people who already shared your TED Talk, maybe?" I blinked. "Wait, 3 million? "Yep," he said, holding up his phone. "And that's just YouTube. Don't even get me started on TikTok." I groaned. "Lord, I didn't even want to be famous." He laughed. "You're not famous, Ma. You're foundational." By fall, the book was in progress, qualified How to Turn Rejection into Revolution. Writing it wasn't easy. Every chapter reopened something I thought had healed. The laughter in that meeting, the lonely nights in my kitchen, the tears in my car. But with every sentence, I felt lighter, like I was exhaling years of silence. One night while I was writing, Marcus peeked in. "Ma, you're still up?" "Almost done," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Just finishing a section about Greg." He hesitated. "You gonna name him?" I shook my head. "No need. The lesson's the name." The book launched 6 months later and hit bestseller lists within a week. But it wasn't the sales that made me emotional. It was the letters, handwritten ones from women who said things like, "You gave me permission to try again. You made me believe age isn't a deadline. You reminded me that silence can speak louder than shouting." One note came from a teenage girl named Zaria. "Miss Harper, I saw your story on my mama's phone. She used to cry before work. Now she gets up early and says, 'Let's make them regret doubting me.' Thank you for giving me a stronger mom." I cried so hard that night, Marcus came running in. "Ma, what's wrong?" I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then whispered, "You did it, Ma. You changed lives." I smiled through tears. "No, baby, God did. I just finally stopped arguing with his plan." The months that followed felt like a new chapter, quieter, humbler, deeper. I started mentoring women personally, not through speeches, not through cameras, just heart to heart. One of them, Alana, reminded me of myself 20 years ago, brilliant, exhausted, and underestimated. She came to me one evening after a session, tears in her eyes. "Miss Harper," she said, voice trembling. "I keep applying for positions I'm overqualified for and still get told no. What do I do?" I looked her in the eyes. "You stop applying and start building. Let no become your business plan." She blinked. "You really believe I can?" I smiled. "I believed before I saw it. That's why I did." That night, after everyone left, I sat in the darkened office, lights from the city flickering against the glass. And it hit me. All the noise, the struggle, the pain, it had turned into purpose. Every "you're not qualified" had been a prophecy in disguise. I whispered to the empty room, "Lord, I get it now. The rejection wasn't punishment. It was protection." A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No logo, no return address, just a simple cream envelope. Inside was a printed invitation. Harvard Business School, Women in Leadership Summit keynote speaker invitation. At the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, "You are the case study now." I laughed, long and loud. Marcus heard me from the kitchen. "What's funny?" I held up the letter. "Remember when they said I wasn't management material?" He grinned. "Now you're teaching management." The Harvard event was surreal. I stood at the podium looking out over hundreds of scholars, executives, and leaders. But I didn't speak like a CEO. I spoke like a woman who survived the storm and learned to dance in the rain. I said, "Power isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people heal because of you." They stood, applauded. But I didn't need it this time. Because for once, the applause inside me was louder than the applause around me. When I got home, I went out to the porch, same rocking chair, same view of the city that used to feel too big for me. Now it felt just right. I closed my eyes and thought of every version of myself. The woman who cried in her car, the one who sold her jewelry to buy a printer, the one who forgave the thief, the one who finally understood peace wasn't a prize, it was a practice. I whispered, "You did good, girl." And for the first time, I believed it. There's something sacred about full circles. They don't just close, they complete. Years ago, I thought my life ended the day that man laughed and told me I wasn't qualified. Turns out, that was the day it began. I'm 60 now. Not the kind of 60 they show in commercials. I've got gray at my temples, laugh lines deep enough to tell stories, and a piece so loud it silences doubt before it even knocks. The company runs itself these days. Marcus is CEO now. Lord, he looks too good in those suits for his own good. Tanya's CFO, still running meetings like she runs Sunday prayer. And me? I sit on the board, mostly sipping tea, offering advice and saying, "I told you so," whenever I get the chance. But every now and then, I still walk through the office early in the morning, before the noise, before the calls, before the day remembers it's busy. I touch that old table in the lobby, the one that started it all, and I whisper, "Look at us now." Last week, a young intern stopped me in the hallway. She looked nervous, twisting her badge lanyard between her fingers. "Ms. Harper," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby. What if I'm not ready?" That sentence, the same one I used to whisper into my own reflection before walking into rooms I didn't feel worthy of. I smiled. Ready is a lie people made up to make you wait. You're already qualified for the moment you show up to. She nodded slowly, like she was memorizing it. I walked away smiling because I saw myself in her. That same tremble of hope under fear. Later that afternoon, I went into my office, the one Marcus redesigned for me when I retired. He'd filled the walls with photos, snapshots of every milestone. One caught my eye. It was a picture of me at the TEDx event, mid-speech, hand on my heart. Next to it, a framed quote from my book, "They laughed because they didn't see the seed, but the harvest was always coming." I stood there for a long while, tears threatening, but not falling. They didn't need to. The moment already understood me. That night, we held our 10-year anniversary gala downtown. Black tie, gold lights, jazz playing low. Marcus stood on stage, microphone in hand. He smiled. When my mother started this company, she had two things, a laptop and a reason. The laptop broke, the reason didn't. The crowd laughed softly. He continued, "She taught me something I live by. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving your purpose right." Applause filled the room. He turned toward me, eyes shining. "So tonight, before we celebrate, I'd like to bring up the woman who taught me everything I know about resilience. My mother, Helen Harper." The room rose, people clapping, cheering, crying, and I walked to that stage, not slow, not shy, but steady. When I reached the mic, I waited until the room went still. "Lord knows I've given a lot of speeches," I began, "but this one feels like coming home." Laughter, warm, familiar. I looked around the room, my team, my family, my legacy, and I said, "There was a time I thought being told I wasn't qualified was an insult. Now I see it was an invitation to build something bigger than the job they denied me. If you remember anything from my story tonight, remember this: rejection is direction, silence is strategy, and grace is revenge that heals both sides." The room erupted, standing ovation, but I wasn't performing anymore, I was releasing. After the gala, Marcus found me standing outside on the balcony, shoes off, heels dangling from my fingers. He said, "You did good, Ma." I smiled. "We did good." He leaned against the railing. "You ever think about what would have happened if Greg never said that to you?" I laughed. "Yeah, I'd probably still be managing his spreadsheets." He grinned. "Funny how pain turns into purpose." I nodded. "And purpose never refunds what it costs you, but it always pays interest." We watched the city lights twinkle below, quiet for a while. Then Marcus said, "You know, Ma, one day there's going to be a little girl reading your story in a classroom." I looked up at the night sky. "Then I hope she knows it's hers, too." A week later, I got another letter. Different handwriting this time, elegant, looping cursive. "Dear Ms. Harper, I'm a professor at Howard University. We teach your story in our Leadership and Legacy seminar. I wanted you to know, the students call you the Quiet Architect, because you didn't just build a company, you built courage in people you'll never meet." I sat back in my chair, hand over my heart. The Quiet Architect. It fit, because all along, I wasn't just constructing success, I was designing belief. Now, some mornings, I sit on that same porch where I used to cry into my coffee. Only now, the mug says, "Qualified, Estierne 2019. I sip slow, watching the sunrise stretch across the horizon like gold spilling from heaven. Sometimes I think of Greg, not with anger, not even with pity, just gratitude. Because if he hadn't tried to shrink me, I might have never learned how to stand tall. And every once in a while, I get a text from him. Short, polite, respectful. Usually something like, "Saw your name in another article. Proud of you." And I always text back, "Thank you, Greg. Stay learning." That's the thing about healing. It doesn't erase the past. It just stops letting it speak first. These days, people still ask me, "Helen, what's your secret?" And I tell them, my secret is simple. I never chase titles. I chase truth. Because truth will always outlive trends. It'll sit beside you when the noise fades, hand you a cup of peace, and whisper, "You made it." If you're watching this, if you've ever been told you're too old, too emotional, too ambitious, too loud, too anything, remember me. Remember this story. And remember, they don't decide your worth. You do. When they say you're not qualified, smile and say, "I guess I'll build something you can't fire me from." Because one day they'll read your name on a door they used to close in your face. And when that day comes, sip your coffee slow, because you earned it. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.